Do you have to be alive to be considered part of a neighborhood? The short black and white film, The Columbarium, explores the very concept of death through the eyes of Emmett Watson, the longtime caretaker of close to 80,000 cremated remains at the Neptune Society Columbarium of San Francisco, and how we can still be a part of a community even after we go. That's what the film answers. I'd like to welcome the director of the film, Tyler Trumbo. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here.
All right, so I kind of botched the opening just then, but if you could give us a synopsis of what's
going on. Yeah. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's about a man and the place that he works. And the place he works he's literally surrounded by, in some ways, by death every day. Right. It's a place that's a repository for cremated remains, and he is the caretaker. He's the one that cleans the glass, but he's also the one that there's each one of these kind of ashes. You're in a little niche, and people fill them with the tokens of their own life. So in some ways, it's almost like a museum where you can walk through and see what was important to each one of these individuals, and like how to whittle down the essence of somebody into the objects that meant something to them.
Yeah.
And so it's his interpretation of life and death by having to take care of these people day in and day out.
What inspired you to make this film? Because obviously, like you said, it's about a guy that he lives his life surrounded by death in a sense, and we can get into kind of like how he feels about it, which I thought you covered well in the film. But how did you get the material?
Well, I was looking around for I was really interested in locations. And I knew I had to shoot in black and white. So I was trying to find places. I'd never shot in black and white before. So I was looking for places that would kind of lend itself to a particular beauty. And I discovered this place, and when I went, itself was interesting, but then when I actually met Emmett, and he is really cherished at the Columbarium. He's not just the custodian, he's almost like custodian for their stories as well. He's like their historian as well. And so when I saw, like you said, someone who's surrounded by death, but how he makes it come alive, I thought for me that's the hook. Because like that's a way, like for me, I was just, I learned something new on how to see death as something that can actually be beautiful. Right. In terms of how we remember the folks that have gone afterwards. And he kind of represented how people can still be alive even after they pass away. Yeah,
and you shot it on super 16 millimeter film, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, was that a part of like a class project that you had to do it, or because I think it really works, like you said, for the film.
Yeah, it was that was kind of the parameters for this particular project I had within school, which I actually loved because it was our first project out of the gate, and for them it gave us restraints as like a teaching tool, essentially, to where by shooting on film and 16 millimeter, these cameras that we had were Bolex film cameras. So it was mechanical, so you had to wind it and it would only go on for 27 seconds. And then it would go out. So you can't have a take that's longer than 27 seconds. And sometimes you forget to crank it back up for your next shot. And you also had to consider lighting, exposure. All these things needed to be calculated and measured. So it was a fantastic teaching tool to like constantly be aware of not just what's in the frame, but what's my lighting source? How intense is it? Do I need more light? And sometimes with a documentary, there was a couple of times where Emmett he was doing his thing and he was bouncing all the way back all across the room, and it made me nervous because I had no idea what I had.
And you had to catch him really quick. There's one when you're doing a pan across the room as he walks, and you can just tell like the camera is like trying to keep up with him, but
he's just like boom. So I was nervous. I mean, and again, it was for me. I'd never shot in film, and so like it was kind of a panic, but then a sense of relief and joy when you actually got the footage back a week later.
Yeah.
Because you had no idea what you had until it was done.
Right. So that's a quick let's geek out sidebar comment. What do you like better, film versus digital?
It depends on the project, I think, to be honest. And especially from a documentary standpoint. Because it really depends on your approach. Like if you're trying to do an observational documentary where you're constantly having to shoot nonstop, then just from a practical sense, I'd prefer digital.
Right.
Just, again, because of the limitations that film has. And sometimes you need to shoot for 20 minutes because you don't know when that moment's going to happen. But I really liked what I liked about the Columbarium and this place that I was in is it gave me the chance to to take my time in a way, which I wouldn't have wanted to shoot it digitally.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm wondering is obviously you had to have a lot of pre-production going into this, like figuring out which shots you wanted to get. Not only that, you're covering him as he's going through his day-to-day activities. So at one point we get to see him like painting, you know, and you just see that care. Could you talk a little bit in terms of pre-production? Did you plan that out? Did you speak with him of like, how are we going to cover this? Or
yeah, a little bit. It was definitely half of it was me wanting to figure out. Like I would just spend time in the space, figuring out what niches I wanted to cover, because the niches too told their own story. I tried to have the niches tell their own stories in some ways, but then for him it was very much a thing of like, it really came down to what are you doing today, or like there were certain days that he was only available for, because I only had a week to shoot. That was like the time that I was given, and I also had to be helping crew for another classmate, so I really only had like 3 days to shoot.
Yeah.
So it really just came down to the time that he had, and then that day he happened to be painting, or that day. There was some things that like I knew I really wanted a shot of. That I'd seen this window, like the opening shot has the stained glass window of him coming out, and I knew that that was there. So I did ask him if we could go and have that done. So like that. So it was part like collaboration between things that really inspired me and the natural things he was doing that day.
I think it's interesting because one of the things that he says in the film is he talks about the stained glass window, right? And he says you look at the stained glass window and you see it as a whole, but I see the different pieces. I think in the same way, the Columbarium is like you look at it, right, the beauty in the frame as a whole, but then you kind of get into those small pieces, right? So just talk a little bit about maybe what are some, because there were some photos in there that like said so much, right? I think it was one of two men that were like in a picture, and they're just having like a ball. But then I have to remember to myself like they're not here with us anymore. But like talk about that choice selection process.
Yeah, well again for me that's what the fascinating thing was again the whole. But then when you take a moment to step back and look at all the pieces that make it up, it's a whole different story. Because when I first stepped in there, I was a little nervous. Before I met Emmett, before anything, I was a little bit overwhelmed because all I could think about is that I'm literally surrounded by dead people. And so like that was my hole at first. But then it was a thing where like if you just hold on and just start looking around, it really is a story of a city. I mean, you had niches from the 1800s of these Wells Fargo chests that was during the gold rush times that are in there. You have things from the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of, what really struck me from an emotional standpoint was that there were a lot of gay men that were in there from the 90s during the AIDS epidemic. That really, for me, like that's an integral part of the city's history. And so in a way, if you look around, these niches build the story of the city. And that really was something that interested me. And I was like, are there ways to tell these subtle stories of the city through these individuals? And
you do it in like 4 minutes, but obviously like we're able to extrapolate, or I was at least, to pull so much out of it. That's amazing. All right, so what is the film doing now? Obviously you're going to be playing in Rosebud. Are you on the film festival circuit?
It's actually kind of coming to a close soon. It opened last year. It played in Virginia Film Festival, and then it played at Slam Dance last year in Park City, and then a couple. I forget where else it's played. Just recently, actually played down in Richmond for the James River Film Society.
Awesome.
They had a shorts collection. So I'm not sure exactly where it will be next. I wouldn't mind it. I want to put it online soon.
That's cool. Do you have anything else that are you still shooting now currently next project?
Not just yet. There's some things in development that I'm trying to figure out. I did finish up a thesis film that I've just started submitting to festivals right now. So I'm waiting to hear back and see what rolls from there. But
awesome. Well, Tyler, I really enjoy the film. I think everybody's going to enjoy it when they see it at the Rosebud Film Festival on January 23rd. But thanks a lot for coming on the show and geeking out with me.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. This is an honor. So thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Take it easy.